Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to a new season of Ripped from the Headlines. And thanks for zooming in. Their sources were put into the chat for those who wish to follow along. And this week's topic is hat tip to my father for sending me the link. I think it's very appropriate ripped topic because it's entitled R.I.P. Rabbi Rips. Rest in peace, Rabbi Rips. We'll learn a little bit about Rabbi Eliyahu Rips, and it's about trying to understand the Torah Codes. There was a book in 1994 that came out that was very popular at the time, the Bible Codes, and it was called The Bible Code by Michael Drosnin, came out in 1998. And this is something that we have encountered. We know we use there are different mechanisms and ways of utilizing the words in the Torah for different indications, different hints, and the like. And we're no strangers for gematria, using numbers. But this comes from Eliyahu Rips. So source number one is from the article announcing his passing. Eliyahu Rips, who claimed to find secret codes in the Torah, dies at 75. So let's read a little bit about him and the overall subject, and then we'll dive into some analysis, some understanding, and also how looking for hints in the Torah has been utilized from some of our traditional commentaries. This is a very appropriate ripped from the headlines topic from the opening sentence. It sounds like a headline ripped from a supermarket tabloid. Now, that could be an interesting sheer series also, ripped from the supermarket tabloid headlines. But 1994, three Israeli researchers claimed to have found a secret code embedded in Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament. But this wasn't junk science. The paper in which they revealed their findings appeared in an esteemed peer-reviewed journal. And the academic reputations of the three authors, Eliyahu Rips, Yoav Rosenberg, and Doron Witzum, were unimpeachable, especially that of Dr. Rips. A math prodigy born to Holocaust survivors in Latvia, he had received his doctorate from and spent his career at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, where he became known for his work in a field called geometric group theory. He'd also become convinced that statistical tools and newer, more powerful computers that were becoming available in the 1980s could be used to identify hidden meaning within the Bible. And he teamed up with his two partners to discover them. Their biggest finding was the names of 32 Jewish scholars in the text, along with their birth or death dates. Several of the scholars had lived thousands of years after Genesis was written. The results, reported in the journal Statistical Science, set off a tempest in the worlds of biblical scholarship and statistical analysis. 1997, Michael Drosnin, a journalist, used the team's tools to write the Bible Code, a global bestseller that claimed to find not just rabbis' birthdays, but also predictions about world events, including the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, the Prime Minister of Israel in 1995, all embedded in the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Old Testament. At first, Dr. Rips endorsed part of Mr. Drosnin's book, but his criticism of it as unscientific mounted, he tried to distance himself from it. The Bible Code, he told Newsweek in 1997, is on very shaky ground and is of no value. Rips died on July 19th at a hospital in Jerusalem at 75. Representative from the Einstein Institute of Mathematics, Regis Center at Hebrew University, where Dr. Rips works, said the cause of his death was stomach cancer. To conduct their experiment, Dr. Rips and his colleagues took the 304,805 letters in the Hebrew version of Genesis. It's actually the Torah has more around the letters of the Torah and arranged them in a grid without spaces between words. Using a computer, they scanned the text using skip codes, a fixed number of letters that would be repeatedly skipped from any starting point, with the caveat that the results could appear forward, backward, diagonally, or vertically. In their paper, they claim not only that their method, known as equidistant letter sequences, or ELS, had found the names of dates in near proximity, but had done so with relatively low skip codes, the odds of which were about 650,000 to 1. They said, we conclude that the proximity of ELSs with related meanings in the book of Genesis is not due to chance, they wrote without speculating about alternative reasons. The paper, when published in Statistical Science, came with an unusual note from its editor, Robert Cass, who called it a challenging puzzle for his skeptical review board. Their prior beliefs made them think the book of Genesis cannot possibly contain meaningful references to modern-day individuals he wrote. Yet when the authors carried out additional analyses and checks, the effect persisted. Eliyahu Rips was born Ilja Rips on December 12, 1948 in Riga, Latvia. Both his parents had narrowly survived the Holocaust. His mother, Tzila Rips, lost her 8 siblings, while his father, Aaron, a mathematician from Belarus, lost his first wife and children. Ilja, who changed his name after emigrating to Israel, excelled in mathematics and entered the University of Latvia in Riga at age 16. He stayed for graduate school in 1969. He learned about a student in Czechoslovakia who had died after setting himself on fire in protest against the Soviet invasion of his country the year before. Overcome with emotion, Dr. Rips attempted to do the same in a plaza near the university. Passers-by put out the flames, but his neck and hands were severely burned. Soviet authorities placed Dr. Rips in a mental institution, effectively a prison. While there, he debunked a major mathematical proof, and when the international mathematics community heard about the achievement, they petitioned for his release. He got out in 1971 and left for Israel the next year. He received his doctorate in mathematics from Hebrew University in 1975 and then joined their faculty. Dr. Rips is survived by his wife Devorah, his children Benjamin, Moshe, Miriam, Aaron, and Meir, and more than 30 grandchildren. Despite the criticism of Mr. Drosden's book, its popularity catalyzed the cottage industry of Bible code breakers. Dr. Rips distanced himself from those too, but stood by his original paper. The only conclusion that can be drawn from the scientific research regarding the Torah Codes, he told Jerusalem Post in 1997, is that they exist and they're not a mere coincidence. So this is the story of Eliyahu Rips. This is the very interesting life post-World War II, originally a protester who almost killed himself protesting the Soviet Union annexation of invasion of Czechoslovakia. Thankfully survived and went on to create a family, out of parents who had survived the Holocaust, of many grandchildren and descendants, and the very well known, especially for the Bible codes. Questions or comments or reaction to Eliyahu Rips? People have heard of the Bible codes before. Anyone read the book?
Rabbi.
There's a bit of an echo, Al. I think if your phone's there too, you may have to.
I didn't disconnect. I didn't disconnect the other phone. Oh, damn it.
All right. But in general, the Bible codes have always, at least I remember, the book came out in 97, 98, 99. I remember this being a very, I guess, popular phenomenon in the mid-90s, being used in terms of in classes and outreach sessions. Famously, Eish HaTorah we utilize the Bible codes, and it comes from mathematics. It comes from it initially appeared before it became a book and more popularly well known was, you see there in source number 2, it was an article in a journal called Statistical Science, and you see kind of the way they introduced the paper. Source number 2, there's an old Jewish tradition about a hidden text in the Hebrew Pentateuch, consisting of words or phrases expressed in the form of equidistant letter sequences. That is, by selecting sequences of equally spaced letters in the text. Since this tradition was passed orally, only few expressions that belong to the hidden text were preserved in writing. He quotes Rabbeinu Bachya and Moshe Cordovero. Actually, almost all the words and syntax are unknown. Rabbi H.M.D. Weissmandl, passed away in 1958, was the first to try to show the existence of such a hidden text by finding interesting patterns consisting of ELSs. Weissmandl was a survivor of the Holocaust, who had been from Hungary. He came after the war, established the yeshiva in Mount Kisco, the Nitra yeshiva, for those who might be familiar. And in the 1950s was, I guess, the predecessor of the Jewish endeavor that Rips attempted. with his colleagues to come to show these ELSs indicated that the Torah was predicting things. Now, generally, proving that the Torah is predicting things is taking place after they happen. So there's a little bit of oh yes, the Torah predicted that Rabin would be shot in 1995, but we only figured out that the Torah predicted that in 1998. So there's a little bit of, you can see where some of the controversy is in terms of reading into it. Also, there are, with so many letters in the Torah, and the idea of looking at it in all sorts of directions when put out in a grid, right? You can find a lot of things. It sounds like gematria, where we sometimes use the numerical value of letters to indicate certain messages. And if it doesn't work, we say, well, if you add the one or take off the one or spell out the letters fully, right? There's a lot of possibilities that it's not necessarily so much as that this is telling us something other than we're trying to take something out of it. And you see there in source number 3, just another explanation, the Eish Torah explanation of how the ELSs work in terms of, looking every X number of letters or seeing how many times, the example they give is the word hammer, or versus how many times the word hammer and anvil appear near each other. And if this happens in the Torah a certain number of times, spaced out a certain number of letters, that's something that's highly unlikely to occur. So if it does happen, and it works out this way, there must be a reason the Torah must be sending us a message. Just again, before we jump into some of the Jewish sources that talk about this, questions, comments, or reactions to the article or the concept or R.I.Ps or the Bible codes.
Yeah, I'm interested in this. I never knew really what to make of this, whether to take it as, I don't know, something that Madonna learns or something, substantive. I really don't know what to make of it. Some of it seems a little weird, but then some of it is there has to be some substance in some of it. I really never knew what to make of this. So I'm very interested in this talk.
Right. Well, I think you see in source number 3, just as an example, any word may appear several times at different skip intervals in the same text. I.e., the Hebrew word hammer may appear in the text every 4th letter at a certain point, somewhere else every 29th letter, and somewhere else every 245th letter. One of these occurrences will be the minimal ELS, right? And in the Hebrew text of the Torah, the minimal ELSs of related words appear encoded in close proximity to each other. Objective experiments are performed on large sets of pairs of words to demonstrate that this effect occurs in Torah much more often than would be statistically expected. So it's a matter of trying to understand statistically how often will hammer and anvil appear together, and if it appears, more often than it quote unquote should, well, does that tell us something? At the same time, with enough letters and studied in enough different ways, up, down, diagonal, you're going to find a lot there. So I think the concept, and it's not, the concept as even introduced and presented, Rabbi R.I.P himself believe that, the way he summarized it, they exist and they're not a mere coincidence. I believe that, as we'll see, that's a very Jewish sentiment, but how much of them are really messages, or how much are messages that we take out of it? Right now, there's nothing wrong with extracting these messages from, there's nothing wrong with extracting the messages from the Torah that we're looking for meaning, right? It's to paraphrase, Frankel's title, it's man's quest for meaning that very often leads us to study Torah and to want to find Torah as validating or impacting or speaking to our experiences. So, we want it to appear that way, and I think that is part of the gematria phenomenon. That's part of as we'll see, the Notre Dame phenomenon, right? And that's something very much built into a traditional understanding of what we should be seeking in the Torah. Now, do we take it to the extent that R.I.P did and his colleagues? Right? Look, they were mathematicians. That was their specialty. They saw everything in terms of the numbers and in terms of possibilities, and in terms of in terms of statistics, and they looked at the Torah that way. So people look at the Torah with gematria all the time, and the Baal HaTurim, for example. So there's there's often, it's not uncommon for us to be seeking these messages, because we think that the Torah is, we sing it every Shabbat, Eitz Chaim Hi, it's the tree of life. We want the Torah to speak to our experiences, our lived experiences, and not necessarily only the way describing a history. I often encourage people to think about how the Torah was received the very first time it came out. Right? Imagine, it's analogous to when Harry Potters were coming out and people would line up around the bookstores to buy it. So imagine the Torah comes out, everyone's lined up to get their copy, and they're reading Bereshit bara Elokim, and they start going through and they read about the stories, Noah, Abraham, Yitzhak. They start thinking, wait a second, at that time we were talking about that guy Noah. Right? There's how the Torah was experienced that very first time by those who were more proximate to when it was revealed, both in terms of divine revelation and when it came out. And then it's also how we look at it today. And the way we look at it today is colored by, are we looking at it from its pshat perspective, just a simple interpretation? Are we looking at it from a halachic perspective? Are we looking at it from a Kabbalistic perspective? And I think that in many ways what Rips is doing is a mathematical perspective. And while he himself may have taken it further, and then people took his science further in other ways, it's still a very traditional mechanism for trying to make sense or trying to find meaning in the Torah. And let's see some of that from that develop from classical attempts to understand the Torah. So, for example, source number 4, Shabbat 105a. Rabbi Yochanan himself said the word Anochi that begins the 10 Commandments is an abbreviation for I myself wrote and gave. So the word Anochi, which means I, and God is saying I took you out of Egypt. God is also saying Ana nafshi ketivat yahavit. I myself wrote and gave you the Torah. So here we have Rabbi Yochanan seeing the word Anochi not just being God saying, I took you out of Egypt, but God making a declaration of the divine nature of the entire Torah. The rabbi said it's an abbreviation for Amira Ne'ima Ketiva Yehiva. A pleasant statement was written and given. Some say the word Anochi can be interpreted backwards. Yehiva Ketiva Ne'emanim Amareha. It was written, it was given, its statements are faithful. Now, this is the whole idea of an abbreviation. That for example, Rabbi can stand for Rosh B'nai Yisrael. So this is the rabbi seeing a word and having a tradition that the word is not just to be translated, but is meant to present a message. Now, there's one thing that stands out for me as being strange about this in terms of God delivering this message. What is strange about all of these rabbinic interpretations or traditions as to the message that God is delivering, if not just saying the word Anochi? What's strange about the messages? Right, it's an abbreviation for a message. What's strange about those messages? Any thoughts? To me, it's strange. They're in Aramaic. It's like God speaking Aramaic. Really, is that how we understand it? God could, of course, and we have Aramaic is a language for the people, not the angels. Okay, but is that really what's implied by the word Anochi? And so on the one hand, it could be, and I would imagine this is one way to understand this Talmudic text, that no, the rabbis are infusing additional meaning of I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt to convey the idea that, yes, as we start the 10 Commandments, we want to emphasize God's authorship of the Torah. We want to emphasize that the Torah is going to be something that is pleasant, that is relevant. And we want to emphasize that it's faithful, right? It doesn't mean, the rabbis took the word Anochi and they pulled out of it meaning. So again, this is not the mathematical equations and analyses, but it's seeing the text and that the text is going to say more than what it presents. And we're going to try and pull out that meaning. And we're going to then declare that that meaning is inside the words themselves. So, some may say skeptically, oh, the rabbis are forcing the subject. But I would venture to say that this is the rabbis taking the words of the Torah and using them as a springboard to anchor into that very same Torah, into the text, into the letters, additional meaning and significance. They want it that will deliver messages far beyond the word or the letters themselves. And that's a very Jewish concept. Source number 5.
Rabbi, can I interrupt?
Yes.
What is the
Yes.
distinction between halacha and Kabbalah?
So halacha is generally used to describe legal, practical aspects of Jewish tradition. Kabbalah is usually used to describe certain more spiritual practices, mystical, sometimes less literal. Something like what we're talking about is not really halachic. Some would say it's mystical, and you'll see an example of this effort being utilized in a mystical perspective in this very next source. Here, source number 4, the Talmudic text gives us an example of the rabbis trying to extract additional messages from the letters of the Torah and read them back into it being the Torah is giving us these messages because these are the letters. Rabbeinu Bachya, in source number 5, in this excerpt, is going to actually do something more along the lines of these, ELSs. So look at source number 5. You should know that we have a tradition which suggests that the 42-lettered name of God is alluded to by the fact there are 42 letters in the first verse of the Torah between the first letter bet and the letter bet in the word vohu in verse 2. So between bet and bet are 42 letters, and this alludes to this mystical 42-letter name of God. The 42-letter name of God is part of the attribute of justice, something which has been derived by the application of many permutations of the letters in God's holy name. When you examine the matter closely, you will find in the arrangement of the letters of the Torah in this opening paragraph a reference to the number Behard, with those letters, the precise time of the creation of the luminaries, which I discussed on page 12. This has to do with the timing of the creation of the universe, something relevant to this time of the year, where we think the creation began on the 25th of Elul, but when, during the day of the 25th of Elul, there's a tradition that is started at a certain period of time, certain hours, certain minutes, certain sections of a minute on that day, kind of what would be called kind of the original Molad. Molad is the first sighting of the moon, but here Molad would be the original creation. Each one of those 4 letters appears at exactly the same distance from each other, just as the letter bet. Right? There's a equidistant letter sequence. The intelligent reader will understand what I refer to. So basically he's making sure that you know that if you don't understand this, you're not intelligent. But one does not need to be especially brilliant to realize that such relationships of a string of letters on the repeated occasions cannot be accidental, but are intended to alert the careful reader to a profound message. The message here is that the creation of the universe reported in our paragraph had not been the first of its kind, but there have been other universes prior to the one we live in. This is alluded to in Psalm 90. B'terem harim yuladu, before the mountains were born, seems to indicate that there was something before the mountains were born. There was a world that existed before. This is the tradition that God created worlds and destroyed them before settling upon this world. That takes us more in a Kabbalistic direction, as Al referenced. But for our purposes, here is Rabbeinu Bachya spacing out the letters, determining the equidistant letter sequences that give us a message, whether it be God's 42-letter name, whether it be about the exact timing of the creation of the world. Here we have basically a classical Bible commentary, a traditional commentary, Rabbeinu Bachya, engaging in the same type of science or same type of mathematics as R.I.P in the Bible codes.
Rabbi Weinstock,
Yes.
is it possible that this is the road that Elisha ben Abuye went down, the Acher, before he got out of the Pardes?
So it's a a good comment. Rosie is referencing, we know when people try to understand the secrets of the Torah, it sometimes leads them astray. It's so perfect segue into source number 6. This is in a book called Seder Hadorot by Rabbi Yechiel Halperin in the 18th century. It's basically a history book of tradition, not chronology or history as as academic, but culling from the different traditional Jewish sources, Talmud, the Rishonim, and the like. And he tells a story about the Ramban, which the Ramban alludes to, but is only described by those students of the Ramban. Nachmanides had a student whose name was Avner. This student became an apostate and rose to power. Right? It seems to be something that's not uncommon when the students were going astray in the Middle Ages and the like. They end up becoming real self-hating Jews that sometimes do the Jewish people a tremendous amount of harm. After some time on the Day of Atonement, the holiday of Yom Kippur, he summoned his teacher Nachmanides. Before his eyes, Avner slaughtered a pig, cooked it, and ate it. And then he asked Nachmanides a shaila: how many transgressions have been committed? How many sins? Right, that's that's why they have the expression: you have to be a Talmud Chacham to be an Apikoros. So Nachmanides said 4. Avner said, no, you don't know anything, Rabbi. They're 5. He then attempted to enter into an argument. Nachmanides gave him an angry, piercing look, and he fell silent, as he still retained a little respect for his teacher. Nachmanides asked Avner, what was it that brought you to such a rebellion? Like, what did I ever do to you? He replied, once I heard you expound that you can find every detail of Jewish observance as well as everything that exists in the Torah world in the Torah reading of Hazinu. And since I knew that this was impossible, I renounced everything and became a different man. So this exactly, Rosie, towards your point, he didn't believe that this is possible, that everything can be found in the Torah. His teacher replied, I will stand by that. Ask what you wish. Avner was astonished and said, if so, show me where my name is mentioned in the Torah. Nachmanides immediately went to the corner of the room and prayed and then returned. It is written, I said that I would make an end of them. I will eradicate their remembrance from mankind. In the Hebrew, the third letter of every word of the verse spells Rabbi Avner. Right, this is from he's talking about the parsha of Hazinu, and he says that in that pasuk, the third letter of each of the words there will present Rabbi Avner. Now, some ask the question, why are you calling him Rabbi Avner? Right? He deserves smicha. He's an apikoros. So the Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, says, well, as we're going to see in the end, it seems that Avner has a desire to do tshuva, so his smicha was restored. When Avner heard this, his face fell. He asked his teacher, is there a cure for my sickness? Nachmanides responded, you have heard the words of the verse itself, telling him that he should disappear and become forgotten, as alluded to in the verse from Deuteronomy. Then Nachmanides left. Immediately after, Avner took a ship and went off to wherever the wind took him and was never heard from again. So, there is, here's, again, this is not the numerology aspect of it, but it is everything can be found in the Torah. And that is that is a very fraught topic, and to stand by that is sometimes going to be very troubling, and in this case it was. Just in case anyone wants to know, it's the verse, it's 32:26, a typo in the sources. The pasuk is Amarti Afehem Ashmisa Me'anosh Zichram, is where they're talking about it's around that area in terms of the psukim about you said that when Nachmanides said to him, it's time to leave. So Avner left, never heard from him again. Maybe that's a little bit of his tshuva. So it's in there, right? What was that? There was that spaghetti sauce commercial. It's in there, right? It's in there. Everything can be found in here. So that's, one, this is the idea of, it can be found. So it could be found. Right now, Ramban found it from words and allusions, from Bachia from numbers. Source number 7, Rabbi Yosef Ergash, Shomer Amunim, 15th century. There are words that are extrapolated using the acronym method from the beginning or end of each word, reading the verse forward or backward. Then there are various schools of methods of numerology and permutation of the Hebrew letters, all based upon the specific secret that is being extrapolated. So too in the gematria method, there's a difference whether the final figure is exact or whether one needs to count the words themselves, adding 1 to the amount to reach the final figure. For what is hinted at using the method of including the words themselves is not hinting at using the straightforward method, as known to anyone who has dived into the depths of this wisdom, for everything is based upon its own specific reason. Right? He is, he's pointing out that it all depends. Right, there's something when you talk about gematria, you add 1. They talk about when you do gematria. Let's say you take the word, it's a simple word. You take the word Abba, Aleph, Bet, Aleph. But is the gematria of that 4, or do you take the gematria of the word Aleph, which is 111, because Aleph is 111. So you take the gematria of the Aleph, the word Aleph, which is 111, and you count the gematria as 1. Rabbi Ergas is saying, it all depends on how you want to do it. You have to be consistent. And so it's kind of like, I always like to tell the story or the joke about the Hasidic Rebbe who says to his Hasidim that if you take the gematria of Kugel, the numerical value of the word Kugel, it's Oneg Shabbos. It's the same as the numerical value of the word enjoying Shabbos. And if you do the math, Oneg Shabbos is numerical value is a lot more than Kugel. So one of the Hasidim confronted the Rebbe and says, Rebbe, Oneg Shabbos has a lot more of a gematria than the word Kugel. So how's it possible that Kugel brings us Oneg Shabbos? So the Rebbe said to him, so eat more Kugel. Which means, we eat enough kugel so that it all equals out in the end. And so that's a bit of a humorous way of pointing out what Rabbi Ergas is saying, that there are a lot of ways to do it. At some level, you can also, you can come out with whatever you want, but you have to be consistent, right? For what is hinted at using the method of including the word cells, not hinted at using the straightforward method, right? It all depends. You're going to get out what you put into it, and you have to be as consistent. So, on some level, the Shomer Amunim is endorsing that you're going to find everything, but it's pointing out a caveat that you have to be consistent. You have to take the same approach to gematria, the same approach to numerology, the same approach to abbreviation. If you're consistent, then it's a fair presentation of the words or the letters saying the message that you want them to. Questions or comments, and then we'll just kind of look at how this was ultimately received and utilized.
Rabbi, is Lakshan Kugel included in this discussion?
As you say that, it could be that really what the Rebbe meant to say that is Lakshan Kugel is equal to Oneg Shabbos, because really the problem is that the word Shabbos itself has a gematria of 702. And Kugel is not enough, but Lakshan already has a gematria, upwards of 400. So the mathematicians on this class can quickly scribble the math, and maybe that's what the Rebbe meant, and you solved a tremendous riddle of Hasidic lore by that suggestion. I think it still comes up a little short, but it's certainly possible.
And then you have to add the gematria of Tums to that.
It depends. I don't know. It depends on the recipe of the Kugel. Maybe Yerushalmi, but again, the idea being, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek and humorous, but it seems as if these mechanisms were utilized, and if they're done in a consistent fashion, there's some validity into the messages that are received. Now, look, we don't live our lives based on numbers and gematrias. We live our lives based, getting back to Al's point before, on halacha. We have a certain way we practice. At the same time, seeking messages, if you just even go through, briefly, the sources that we saw, seeking out messages from words and letters was something that is very much part of the Jewish tradition. It was done to seek out some mystical meaning in the letters, even Bereshit, even using the exact type of ELSs that were used in the Torah Codes by Rabbeinu Bachya. The idea of finding all of these messages was something that is we see in the story of the Ramban, and we see that it's complicated and it can sometimes lead people astray with regard to Avner. And the Shomer Amunim pointing out that there's going to be a lot of different paths to go down, and if you follow one consistently and end up with a message, there's something to be said for this.
Do you have
Now,
preference, Rabbi, as to any kind of kugel, or no preference?
so it's interesting. If there's a choice of one, I probably would say potato, but the asterisk is it depends where. Like there's certain places that I've been to, especially in Yerushalayim, that I may change that answer to a Yerushalmi. So one place in particular that the Yerushalmi is much better than everything else. But and then keeping Rosie's warning in mind of Tom's is important. But how was this received? So source number 8 is from an article that was analyzing the Torah Codes, and one of the authors is R.J. Aumann, Rabbi Aumann, Yisrael Aumann, very famously a Israeli Nobel Prize winner on game theory. So he was very much focused on numbers. Right, and he's still alive, 94 years old. We come finally to the bottom line. All right, what's the bottom line? He's a religious Jew from a mathematical perspective. A priori, the thesis of the Codes research seems wildly improbable. The original work of Whitson, Rips, and Rosenberg and that of Gans established a prima facie case for the existence of the Codes. This case was undermined by the work of the opponents. Research conducted under my own supervision failed to confirm the existence of the Codes, though it also did not establish their non-existence. So I must return to my a priori estimate that the Codes phenomenon is improbable. Spoken like a true Talmudic mathematician, right? Doesn't like to say the words yes or no. An a priori estimate that it's improbable. Okay, try to hold him to anything when it comes to that, but there's a lot of skepticism that they're necessarily predictive in their scientifically, mathematically, you can't prove that they predict what they say, what some of the claims that they're said to predict actually predict. So here's a kind of a faithful mathematical position that they could exist, but mathematically speaking, the proofs for their existence have been undermined, and their existence mathematically is improbable. So that's the from mathematical approach. Source number 9 from Esha Torah, and so an organization that has utilized them in some of its classes. Despite the controversy, there's high-level rabbinic endorsement for Codes research. In 1997, a public statement was issued in Jerusalem by the renowned Rabbi Shlomo Fisher, endorsing the validity of Codes research, vouching for the integrity of the researchers, and encouraging its presentation to lay audiences. Right? Doesn't say they exist, doesn't say you have to follow them, but saying Codes research is good. The people who are doing it, the research is good, and presenting the findings is good. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach met with the Codes researchers on several occasions and not only gave his approval to Codes research, but also encouraged its use in Jewish outreach efforts. I'm sure the Codes debate will rage for many years, probably until the Mashiach comes. Finally, a statement we could all absolutely agree with, beyond any mathematical doubt. So we've kind of come full circle. The initial efforts were done from a very traditional religious viewpoint in addition to mathematics. Further investigation showed some doubt and some skepticism from a mathematical perspective. From a religious perspective, those who were doing it correctly and for L'Shem Shamayim seem to have the rabbinic endorsement of the efforts being okay, even though there's no endorsement of the findings or what's being presented, but there's some positive value in it. As we see it continues a long established tradition of seeking out meaning, recognizing that seeking out that meaning can be fraught and can also lead people astray. unless it's attempted and undertaken in a more consistent fashion. And I think that this very much may fit with the idea that's presented in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, our teachings, where it talks about what are the meat and potatoes of Torah are some of the complicated rules and laws, even those that aren't necessarily relevant for everyone. Getting into the nitty-gritty of Jewish law, that's the main essence of the tradition. And what does it say about gematrios? It kind of says that they're like desserts, or they're like the spices. It spices up our tradition, but you can't just eat the spices. I'm sometimes loath to quote the song these days, but you can't eat your pudding if you don't eat your meat. You have to. You can't eat dessert without eating the main course. And this may be some of the dessert aspects, but sometimes we get together just for coffee and dessert. So there's sometimes that opportunity. But I think that recently the passing of Rabbi Eliyahu Rips is an opportunity to rip from that headline a discussion of seeking of ways that some of these spices and for external examinations have created some additional meaning in the text, and it continues a long tradition of seeking to do so. Hopefully properly with the right type of safeguards and consistency that is being done to add on and not to divert us from the key parts of the Torah, not to go astray. And hopefully all of our Torah experiences will focus on the essence and on the meat and potatoes, but will also be very tasty and enjoyable for our Eitz Chaim, our Torah, our tree of life.
Amen.
Great way to conclude it, and hopefully we'll continue some additional topics pivoted to the high holidays either next week or the week after. And as always, suggestions of headlines you wish us to rip from are welcome.
Good gematria, simple one this time of year, Shana, 355, the approximate number of days in a Jewish calendar.
Except when you have a leap year.
Uh-oh.
Exactly.
Thank you.